My life changed forever after 3 weeks of being deaf. It wasn't because I'd lost my ability to hear, but because I had gotten it back. When a person can't hear, others assume they can say anything they want. My daughter thought the same way. What I overheard when I got back from the hospital made me wish I could still be deaf, but it also gave me a perfect opportunity for revenge. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor felt like a symphony to my ears. After 3 weeks of total silence, that simple electronic beat sounded more beautiful than any music Helen and I had ever danced to. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling my own heartbeat match the machine's rhythm. Dr. Lee's voice came through crystal clear, not muffled or distant, but perfect. He asked if I could hear him. I simply nodded, afraid that speaking would somehow break this miracle. The hearing test headphones still covered my ears, and every tone, every whisper, and every breath registered with stunning clarity. My hands trembled as I took them off. I whispered that it had all returned, and then spoke louder, marveling at the sound of my own voice. It seemed that everything had come back. Dr. Lee smiled, making notes on his tablet. The sound of the stylus scratching against the screen was another sound I had forgotten. He explained that the inflammation had completely subsided and that my hearing was now testing at normal levels across all frequencies. 3 weeks ago, a construction site accident had stolen my world of sound. A falling beam hadn't hit me, but a nearby pneumatic drill had malfunctioned next to my ear, causing some sort of temporary damage. They had said the deafness was complete and might even be permanent, but here I was, listening to the hospital's symphony. The elevator dings, footsteps in the corridor, distant conversations, and the whoosh of automatic doors. My daughter, Jessie, would be so surprised. She had been taking such good care of me, moving into the house to help while I recovered. My heart warmed just thinking about her reaction. I mentioned that I needed to call her. Dr. Lee suggested we finish the discharge process first, since they wanted to make sure everything was properly documented. I signed papers with shaking hands, barely reading the words, and heard the pen scratching against the paper. A nurse named Sarah explained my follow-up appointments, but I was only half listening. I kept thinking about Jessie's face when I walked through the front door and called out her name. Sarah mentioned that I should take it easy for a few days, as my brain needed time to readjust to processing all these sounds again. I thanked them both and walked toward the elevator, my footsteps echoing in the hallway. Each sound felt like a gift being unwrapped. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the parking garage. Even that tiny click seemed important. My Honda Civic was waiting in the same spot where Jessie had dropped me off 3 weeks ago. I'd been so scared back then, facing the possibility of permanent deafness. Now, when I started the engine, I almost laughed at the familiar rumble. The radio came on automatically, playing some classic rock that Margaret used to love. I said aloud that everything happens for a reason, repeating something Margaret used to tell me during difficult times. My voice sounded strange in the car's enclosed space, but it was wonderfully clear. The 15-minute drive home went by in a blur of rediscovered sounds. Traffic hummed all around me. Other engines revved, brakes squeaked, and horns honked in the distance. I had forgotten how noisy the world was, how full of life. My neighborhood looked the same as always, with neat suburban houses and carefully maintained lawns and driveways. Mrs. Anderson was gardening next door, her rake scraping against the concrete. 2 houses down, children played in their backyard, their laughter carried on the March breeze. A dog barked somewhere, and another answered from across the street. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the 2-story colonial house Margaret and I had bought 30 years ago. Jessie's car was parked beside the walkway. She must be inside, probably preparing dinner or watching her afternoon shows. My hand hesitated on the door handle. Should I call out as soon as I entered, or should I just surprise her? Maybe I could find her in the kitchen and start talking normally, and then watch her face transform with joy and amazement. I decided on the surprise. As I walked up the front steps, I heard voices from inside. It sounded like Jessie and Chris were talking in the kitchen. Perfect. I could surprise them both. I slipped my key into the lock as quietly as possible and eased the front door open. The voices became clearer as I stepped into the hallway. I heard Jessie's voice from the kitchen, sharp with irritation. She was complaining that the old burden was back home again. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob. The words hit me harder than that falling beam ever could have. A burden. Chris's voice followed, equally clear. He mentioned that at least the insurance money would help with my medical bills, and that it could have been worse. My legs suddenly felt weak. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, hardly breathing. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe I had misheard something since my hearing had just returned. But Jessie's next words cut through any hope of misunderstanding. She just wanted this whole thing to be over with. For 3 weeks, she had been pretending to care about my every need, and she was exhausted. The world tilted around me. My own daughter's voice was speaking about me as if I were some unwanted obligation. The daughter I'd supported through college, helped through her divorce, and welcomed into my home whenever she needed help. I remained perfectly still in that hallway, listening to the 2 people I had trusted most, realizing they had no idea I could hear every word they were saying. It felt like someone had reached inside my chest and twisted everything around. The hallway seemed to stretch and contract with each heartbeat as Jessie's words echoed in my mind. That old burden. For 3 weeks, I had believed she was there because she loved me, because she wanted to help her father through the worst crisis of his life. I had been such a fool. My legs threatened to give out, but I forced myself to stay upright, pressed against the wall. I needed to hear more. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before making any decisions. Moving carefully along the hallway, I positioned myself closer to the kitchen doorway. Their conversation continued, and each word felt like another nail in the coffin of my trust. Jessie was talking about a place called Sunset Manor, mentioning that it had good reviews and wasn't too expensive. She said the insurance settlements should cover the initial deposit. Chris chuckled, a sound that had once seemed friendly. He was talking about how once I was out of here, they could finally start renovating the place. He mentioned a new kitchen and maybe knocking out the wall between the dining room and living room. The realtor had told them that it could add $50,000 to the value. Jessie added, maybe more, depending on what they did with the master bathroom. They were planning my life as if I was already dead, discussing my house as if it was already theirs. I gripped the wall so hard my knuckles turned white, fighting to keep my breathing silent. They weren't finished. Chris asked if I suspected anything. Jessie responded that he couldn't hear a thing. She said the poor old man just sits there nodding and smiling while she writes him notes, and that it was actually kind of pathetic. The contempt in her voice, my own daughter's voice, made my stomach turn. I thought about all the notes she had written over the past 3 weeks, all those exaggerated smiles and gentle pats on my shoulder. It was all an act. I had to test this. I had to see just how good their acting really was. Taking a deep breath, I gave myself a silent pep talk. I would act confused and grateful. I would watch their faces and see how well they could lie to someone they thought couldn't catch them. I walked into the kitchen, making sure my footsteps were slightly heavier than usual, like someone who was unsure of their balance. Jessie and Chris were sitting at the kitchen table, and their transformation was immediate and complete. Jessie jumped up, her face instantly filled with what looked like genuine concern. She rushed over and gently took my arm. She asked how I was feeling and said I looked tired. The same voice that had called me a burden 60 seconds ago now dripped with fake sweetness. I allowed myself to lean into her touch, playing the part of the grateful, confused father. Chris raised his voice unnecessarily, the way people do when they think someone can't hear properly. He greeted me and asked how the appointment went. I nodded and shrugged, then pointed to my ears with a questioning look. Jessie immediately grabbed a notepad from the counter. She had gotten quite good at this routine over the past 3 weeks. She wrote that the doctor said my hearing might return soon and that it was wonderful news. I read the note, allowing hope to show on my face. Inside, I was cataloging every detail of her performance. The way she widened her eyes to look excited, the way she squeezed my shoulder as if she were sharing in my joy, and the way Chris nodded enthusiastically beside her as if he cared about anything other than when I would be out of his way. Chris leaned forward and wrote his own note. He suggested that they should start looking into care options for when I was feeling stronger. Jessie quickly added a line below his words, saying it would just be temporary until I was fully recovered. She wrote that it would just be so I had help with medications and physical therapy, and that it wasn't a permanent arrangement. I nodded eagerly, as if this sounded like wonderful news. Inside, I noted how smoothly they had transitioned from discussing nursing homes for my convenience to presenting it as temporary medical care. They had thought this through. For the next few minutes, I played my part perfectly. I pointed at things and looked confused when they responded verbally. I nodded gratefully when Jessie wrote down questions about whether I was hungry or needed anything. I even managed what I hoped looked like a tired but contented smile when Chris patted my back and wrote that they were so glad I was okay. Every gesture felt like swallowing poison, but I forced myself to maintain the performance. I needed to know more. I needed to understand exactly what they had planned and how long I had before they tried to carry it out. Finally, I pointed upstairs and wrote my own note, saying that I was tired and going to rest. Jessie actually hugged me, and said loudly that I should rest as much as I needed to. I walked slowly toward the stairs, feeling their eyes on my back. Just before I reached the first step, I heard Chris's voice, much quieter now, but still perfectly clear to my restored hearing. He said that I had completely bought their story. I climbed those stairs one deliberate step at a time, my hand gripping the banister to keep from shaking. When I reached my bedroom, I closed the door quietly and sat on the edge of the bed Margaret and I had shared for 30 years. The house felt different now. The walls that had always meant safety and family now felt like a trap. The daughter I had raised and loved had become a stranger, and I was apparently nothing more than an obstacle between her and my money. I stared at the framed photo on my nightstand. It showed Jessie at her college graduation, her arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning at the camera. That girl was gone, if she had ever really existed at all. But I was far from helpless. They thought they were dealing with a confused, deaf old man who would gratefully accept whatever scraps of care they threw his way. They had no idea what they had awakened. Margaret's wedding ring still sat in the small dish on my nightstand. I picked it up with trembling fingers, remembering how she used to twist it when she was thinking. She would have known what to do about Jessie. She always saw through people better than I did. From downstairs, I could hear their voices continuing in the kitchen. They thought they had all the time in the world to plan my future. I set Margaret's ring back and moved carefully toward my bedroom door. The old house had excellent acoustics. I had helped design some renovations myself 20 years ago. The heating vent near the stairs carried sound from the kitchen beautifully, and if I positioned myself just right in the hallway, I could hear everything. I tested each step, remembering which floorboards creaked. The third step groaned on its left side, but the right edge stayed silent. Knowledge from decades of living here was now serving a purpose I had never imagined. I reached my position and heard Chris saying that Sunset Manor was $4,800 monthly, but that Medicare would cover most of it if they could get the right medical evaluations. Jessie's voice carried clearly through the vent. She said the realtor had told them they could get at least $470,000 for the house. After paying off the mortgage, that would leave them $320,000 for the down payment on that house in Whitefish. My house, the home Margaret and I had built our life in, where we had raised our children, where she had taken her last breath. They were discussing it like a commodity. Chris asked what the timeline was. Jessie responded that it would be 2 months, maybe less. She said they needed to establish a pattern of incompetence first, documenting incidents and memory issues. She then mentioned that a doctor friend named Dr. Henderson owed her a favor from when she had helped him buy that Camaro, and that he could write up whatever evaluation they needed. I gripped the banister so hard my knuckles turned white. They weren't just planning to abandon me. They were planning to fabricate evidence of mental decline. My own daughter was plotting to destroy my reputation and independence. Footsteps moved across the kitchen floor, and Jessie's voice grew closer. I heard her say that she should check on me and make sure I wasn't getting suspicious. I moved quickly but silently back to my bedroom, positioning myself as if I had been napping. I had learned to control my breathing during those long nights watching over Margaret. Jessie's footsteps climbed the stairs. I noticed she avoided that creaky third step. She spoke loudly, saying that she had brought me some tea. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking as if disoriented. Jessie stood in my doorway holding a steaming mug, her face arranged in loving concern that made my stomach turn. She set the mug on my nightstand, right next to Margaret's ring dish. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. My wife's memory was being displaced by my daughter's deception. Jessie spoke slowly, asking if I was feeling okay, since I had looked tired earlier. I nodded and reached for the notepad. I wrote, "Thank you. You're so good to me." The words tasted like poison, but Jessie's smile brightened. She patted my shoulder with what might have looked like affection to anyone who couldn't see the calculation in her eyes. She told me to rest as much as I needed to and that she and Chris would take care of everything. After she left, I lay still, listening to her footsteps retreat. Then I heard her voice again, reporting back to Chris. She said I was completely clueless, just like they had planned, drinking my tea like a good little patient. Chris chuckled. He said it was perfect and suggested they should accelerate the timeline, asking why they should wait 2 months. He said Dr. Henderson could do the evaluation next week and that they could just say I had been having episodes, wandering around, being confused, forgetting to eat, and leaving the stove on, standard dementia stuff. Jessie paused, and I found myself holding my breath. She thought that could work if they documented a few more incidents over the next couple of weeks. Exactly, Chris said. By the end of the month, they could have me placed and be looking at house listings. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. They weren't just betraying me. They were planning to erase me, to strip away my independence, my dignity, my home, everything that made life worth living. But they had made one crucial mistake. They thought they were dealing with a helpless, deaf old man who would accept whatever fate they chose. They had no idea that every word they spoke was building my case against them. I reached for my wallet and pulled out a business card I had kept there for 3 years. Bob Miller, attorney at law. He had handled Margaret's estate and had been encouraging me to update my own will. Tomorrow, I would call Bob. Tonight, I would listen to every word they said. They wanted to play games with an old man's life. I was about to show them exactly how dangerous that could be. The business card felt substantial between my fingers as I walked to my study, the room where I had managed our family finances for 30 years. Bob Miller's number was printed in conservative blue ink, matching the folder where I kept important documents. I pulled open the filing cabinet and began searching through years of organized records, bank statements, tax returns, receipts, the paper trail of a life spent providing for others. What I found made my chest tight with pain. I saw Jessie's wedding receipt, $35,000. I remembered cashing out part of my 401k and working overtime for months to rebuild what I had lost. She had told me to make it perfect, saying that her mom would have wanted everything to be beautiful. Student loan statements showed $28,000 in payments I had made after her graduation. I remembered Jessie crying in my kitchen when she was 20 years old, terrified. She had said she couldn't finish school because the debt was too much. I had written those checks without hesitation. An apartment down payment, $15,000. Another chunk of my retirement. Another sacrifice made gladly because she was my daughter and needed help. But there was something else. Margaret's medical bills from those final months. $67,000 in treatments that insurance hadn't covered. Bills I had paid alone while Jessie found excuses to stay away. She had said she couldn't handle seeing her like this. The numbers blurred as my hands shook. Over $100,000 given freely to a daughter who now called me a burden. I pulled out a photo from Jessie's college graduation. She stood between Margaret and me, her arms around both our shoulders, her smile radiant with possibility. She had whispered that she couldn't have done it without me and that she would never forget how much I had sacrificed. The memory triggered others, flooding back like water through a broken dam. Jessie at 19 sobbing over student debt, saying that everyone else had parents who could help them. She wasn't thinking about the extra shifts I was already working or the vacation I had canceled to afford her textbooks. Jessie at 25 planning her wedding, saying that I would always have a home with them and that it was a promise. Chris nodded beside her, his thank you sounding rehearsed. Even then, Jessie at 32 missing Margaret's funeral planning because Chris had a work event. She had said that I understood, didn't I, and that it was a big promotion opportunity, and that her mom would want him to go. I stood alone in the funeral director's office while my daughter worked 2 states away, and Margaret in those final weeks, asking the question that broke my heart. Where's Jessie today? I lied with practiced ease, saying that she would come tomorrow and was just busy. Margaret nodded, accepting the lie because she wanted to believe her daughter cared. The pattern was clear now. Jessie was always taking, offering promises as currency for future needs, and I was enabling every request because I had confused generosity with love. Margaret had seen the truth even then and had tried to warn me in her gentle way. I remembered her telling me I was creating a dependency by always solving Jessie's problems. I had argued that we help family, but she replied that there was a difference between helping and enabling, and between gratitude and entitlement. Now, surrounded by evidence of my misguided generosity, I finally understood what my wife had been trying to tell me. Jessie hadn't learned to appreciate my help. She had learned to expect it. When I became the one needing care, she had seen only a burden blocking her access to what she had always considered rightfully hers. I looked at the photo one more time, then placed it face down in the drawer. The girl in that picture was gone. In her place was a woman who would fabricate mental illness to steal my independence, who would conspire with a doctor to declare me incompetent, who would sell the home where her mother died to fund her own dreams. But I wasn't confused. I was angry, and I was going to call Bob Miller first thing in the morning. I reached for my address book, flipping to the H section where I had written his home number years ago. Some conversations couldn't wait for business hours. Jessie had taught me a valuable lesson about family loyalty, and now I was going to teach her one about consequences. I woke the next morning with Bob Miller's business card still clutched in my hand. The numbers on my alarm clock read 7:30 a.m., and I could already hear Jessie moving around in the kitchen below, preparing what she probably considered her daily performance of a caring daughter. From my bedroom window, I watched Chris loading something into their car. Their voices drifted up through the morning air, something about shopping and errands. Perfect. I needed them gone for what I had planned. I made my way downstairs, moving with the careful, uncertain steps of someone still adjusting to hearing loss. Jessie looked up from the stove where she was scrambling eggs, her smile bright and artificial. She called out a cheerful good morning, announcing she had made my favorite breakfast. I nodded gratefully and pointed to my ears with a questioning expression. She grabbed her ever-present notepad and wrote a question asking if I would be okay alone for a few hours while she and Chris went shopping. I wrote back, "Yes, thank you for taking such good care of me." The lie tasted bitter, but Jessie's pleased expression told me she bought it completely. She kissed my forehead, a gesture that once would have warmed my heart and now made my skin crawl. She said they would be back around 3 and that there was soup in the refrigerator if I got hungry. After they left at 10:45, I waited exactly 15 minutes before reaching for the phone. Some habits from my engineering days die hard. Always double-check your measurements. Always verify your timeline, and always have a backup plan. Bob Miller answered on the second ring. He sounded surprised that I was having hearing difficulties. I explained that it was complicated and urgent, and asked if he could see me today. He said he could fit me in at 11:30, but questioned my certainty. I told him I had never been more certain of anything. The drive to downtown Missoula took 12 minutes. Bob's office sat in a converted Victorian house on West Alder Street, the same building where he had helped me navigate Margaret's estate 5 years ago. His secretary, Mrs. Patterson, spoke to me at a normal volume, saying how wonderful it was that I was feeling better. I told her I was much better. Bob emerged from his inner office, a tall man with gray temples who had been handling my legal affairs for over a decade. His handshake was firm, his expression concerned. He had to ask if I was experiencing any cognitive difficulties or any confusion or memory issues. I looked him directly in the eyes and explained that I needed to change my will immediately to leave everything to my son, Michael. My daughter, Jessie, would only receive $1,000 for reasons she would understand. He noted that it was a dramatic change from my current will and asked if I was absolutely certain. I simply told him to get the papers ready and that I would sign them today. For the next hour, we worked through the details. The house valued at $450,000, my savings account with $180,000, and my investment portfolio worth another $120,000. A total estate of approximately $750,000. All of it was now destined for Michael, instead of the daughter who had called me a burden. He said he would need witnesses for the signing. I also requested a copy to take home with me that day. He said that was unusual, but doable. By 1:15 p.m., the new will was signed, witnessed, and filed. I walked out of Bob's office with a sealed envelope containing a copy, feeling lighter than I had in weeks, not because of what I had taken away from Jessie, but because of what I had taken back, control over my own life. At home, I placed the envelope prominently on the kitchen counter, right where Jessie would see it when she returned from shopping. Then I positioned myself in the living room with the newspaper, settling into my recliner, where I could hear everything that happened. At 2:45 p.m., I heard their car doors slam in the driveway. I heard Jessie's voice hoping that I hadn't tried to cook anything while they were gone. The front door opened, followed by the rustle of shopping bags and footsteps heading toward the kitchen. Then silence, followed by a sharp intake of breath that could have cut glass. The envelope crackled as Jessie tore it open. I could hear every sound, the rip of paper, the rustle of documents. then absolute stillness that seemed to stretch forever. Her voice was a barely audible whisper as she told Chris to come into the kitchen right away. Footsteps pounded across the kitchen floor. Chris's voice followed, asking what was wrong and saying she looked like she'd seen something terrible. I heard the rustle of papers as she told him to look at it, exclaiming that the old man had changed his will. Chris's voice was sharp with alarm as he asked what she meant. She read aloud the part that left my entire estate to my son, Michael. Chris said it couldn't be legal and asked when I had done it. She told him it was dated today, and while they were out buying groceries, I had been downtown signing away their future. A chair scraped against the floor, followed by the sound of someone pacing. Chris asked how much it was, listing the house, savings, and investments. Jessie's voice cracked as she said they had just lost over $700,000 to her brother, who hadn't visited in 2 years. She said there had to be a way to challenge it, mentioning mental incompetence and undue influence. Jessie told him there was more to listen to. She read the line that left her only $1,000 for reasons she would understand. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of heavy breathing. Chris slowly repeated the phrase, wondering what it meant. Jessie's voice went cold and calculating. She said it meant I knew, and that somehow I had figured out what they were planning. Chris said it was impossible because I couldn't hear a thing and they had been talking right in front of me for weeks. She challenged him to explain the will. Chris's voice became calm as he suggested they think logically, saying maybe I wasn't as incompetent as they thought and had been testing them. Jessie's voice rose dangerously as she asked if I had been testing them by pretending to be deaf while they planned my future. She called me a manipulative son of a gun. Chris reminded her to keep her voice down since I was in the next room. She didn't care if I heard her, saying if I had been playing games, they were over. Footsteps moved toward the living room. I closed my eyes completely and let the newspaper droop slightly in my hands, a picture of an elderly man dozing in his chair. Her voice was sickeningly sweet again as she called out to me. She asked if I was awake. I stirred slowly, blinking in confusion as I looked up at her. Her face was flushed, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I asked if she had a good shopping trip. She stared at my face, searching for any sign of deception. She asked if I had gone anywhere today while they were out. I looked confused and asked why I would go anywhere. She asked if I had visited anyone or made any phone calls. I touched my ears with a sad smile and reminded her I couldn't hear well enough for phone calls. She apologized, saying she had forgotten. She turned and walked back to the kitchen, and I heard her whisper to Chris that I was either the best actor in the world or they were missing something. She asked what he wanted to do and suggested they call Dr. Henderson to get the papers tomorrow instead of next week. She said if I was playing games, they would show me how the game ends. If I was actually confused and the will was a coincidence, I wouldn't remember signing it anyway, and either way, by Friday, I would be declared incompetent and they would contest the will as the product of a diseased mind. I sat in my chair, the newspaper trembling slightly in my hands, and felt a smile pull at the corners of my mouth. The sound of Jessie stabbing numbers into the kitchen phone carried clearly to my position. She spoke into the phone, relieved that Michael had answered. She told him everything was not okay and that I had completely lost my mind. She explained that I had changed my will and left everything to him, cutting her out completely except for an insulting $1,000 token. I could hear Michael's voice faintly, but Jessie's responses told me everything I needed to know about his reaction. She explained that it happened today while she and Chris were out. She said she had sacrificed everything to take care of me, given up her own life, and this was how I repaid her. She insisted I wasn't mentally competent and that the will was the product of a diseased mind. She told him he needed to refuse the inheritance so it could be split fairly between them. He must have questioned her because she exploded, asking what good reasons I could possibly have, and saying she was my daughter who had been taking care of me while he lived a comfortable life in Seattle. She said she couldn't believe he would judge her, and that he only visited once a year and sent a Christmas card but was now an expert on what I needed. I heard the phone slam down, followed by the sound of her angry footsteps. Perfect timing. I stirred in my chair and looked around with the confused expression of someone just waking up. I asked if someone had been on the phone, saying I thought I heard voices. She whirled around, her face still flushed with rage, but immediately tried to rearrange her features into something resembling concern. She said she had just been talking to Michael. I asked if everything was all right, saying she looked upset. She said we needed to talk about the changes I had made to my will that day. I feigned confusion, asking what changes she was talking about. She dismissed it as too complicated and told me to rest. I said that if she was sure everything was all right, I would go lie down since all the excitement had made me tired. I made my way upstairs, moving with the careful steps of an elderly man. But once I reached my bedroom and closed the door, I moved with purpose. My cell phone was in the nightstand drawer, a phone Jesse didn't even know I had. I dialed Michael's number from memory. He answered cautiously. I told him it was me, and there was a long pause before he spoke my name in surprise. He asked how I was calling him since Jesse had said I was having hearing problems. I told him to sit down, saying what I was about to tell him would be shocking, and asked him to promise to keep our conversation private. He said of course, and asked what was going on. I explained that my hearing had returned completely 3 days ago, but that I hadn't told Jessie because I had discovered what she really thought of me. He asked what I meant. I told him she had called me an old burden and that I had overheard her and Chris planning to put me in a nursing home to sell my house and use the money for property. He asked if I was absolutely certain. I assured him I had heard every word and that they had a doctor friend who would forge medical evaluations to have me declared incompetent. The silence stretched so long I thought we had been disconnected. He said he was just processing it and asked if the phone call from Jessie was her trying to get him to refuse the inheritance. I confirmed that was exactly what she was doing. He apologized and said he should have visited more often. I told him I understood he had his own family, but that I needed his help now. I said they were moving faster than I expected and might try something tomorrow. I explained that I could hear him perfectly and that my hearing had come back 3 days ago, but I had been pretending to be deaf because of what I had discovered about Jessie. He asked why I didn't tell Jessie if I could hear. I told him the first thing I heard when I came home was her calling me an old burden and that I heard her plans to put me in a nursing home to sell my house to buy a place in Whitefish. He asked if she had actually said that. I told him those were her exact words, but that wasn't the worst part. I told him they had a doctor friend who would create forged medical evaluations to have me declared mentally incompetent and contest any legal decisions. I explained that this was why I changed the will, to protect myself. I also told him that I had overheard them saying that the doctor had confirmed for Friday morning, and they were accelerating their timeline. Michael said he felt sick, thinking about all the years I supported her, and that Margaret had always seen through Jessie's act. He said he should have listened to her more carefully. He asked what I needed him to do and if he should come. I told him not yet, and that when Jessie called him back, I wanted him to play along, express concern about my mental state, and suggest a visit. He said he didn't like lying to family. I explained that she stopped being family the moment she decided to steal from me, and she was counting on his decency to help her commit fraud. He said I was right and asked what else he needed to do. I told him to keep playing the concerned brother and to document everything she told him because we might need it later. He asked what I was planning. The life we'd built together in this house that Jessie wanted to sell. I'm planning to remind your sister exactly who she's been underestimating. She thinks she's dealing with a confused, helpless old man. Tomorrow she's going to discover just how wrong she's been. Be careful, Dad. If she's desperate enough to commit fraud, there's no telling what else she might do. Don't worry about me, son. I survived 30 years as a construction engineer and 5 years of grief. I can handle one greedy daughter and her worthless husband. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, listening to Jessie and Chris planning their final assault on my freedom. They had no idea their victim had been listening to every word, documenting every lie, and preparing his own surprise. Through the kitchen window blinds, I watched Jessie and Chris load shopping bags into their 2018 Ford Escape. Jessie was gesturing frantically at something on her phone while Chris checked his watch for the 3rd time in 2 minutes. We'll be back by 2 p.m. I heard Chris call toward the house, though they thought I couldn't hear him. Don't forget Dr. Henderson comes tomorrow at 10 sharp. Jessie's voice carried across the driveway in that artificially sweet tone she perfected over the past few days. Dad, we're going shopping. Back soon. I remained motionless behind the blinds until their car disappeared around the corner. Then I allowed myself a smile. 3 hours. More than enough time to prepare their farewell gift. I walked slowly through the house, taking inventory. Jessie had made herself quite comfortable in the guest bedroom she'd claimed as her own. Her dresser drawers overflowed with expensive clothes, silk blouses, designer jeans, and jewelry that glittered even in the dim light. All purchased, I noticed from the receipts scattered on her nightstand, with credit cards that showed my address as the billing location. Chris had claimed the guest closet for his belongings: 3 business suits, golf clubs, an expensive laptop, and electronic gadgets I couldn't even identify. The price tags on his golf bag alone would have fed a family for a month. From the basement storage room, I retrieved 2 large suitcases Margaret and I had used for our anniversary trips to Yellowstone. The leather was still supple, the brass fittings still bright. These bags had carried happy memories once. Now they would carry something else entirely. I began with Jessie's things, folding each item with the same meticulous care I'd once used for architectural blueprints. Her wedding dress, preserved in plastic since her marriage to Chris, the photo albums from college funded with my retirement money, the jewelry box I'd given her for her 16th birthday, now filled with pieces I'd never seen her wear. Chris's belongings went into the second suitcase: his expensive electronics, his collection of golf accessories, the leather portfolio containing some Zen business cards from jobs he'd never quite managed to keep. Everything they'd brought into my house, everything they'd accumulated while living under my roof and planning my downfall. As I packed, I found myself remembering Margaret's words from Jessie's last visit before she got married. "That girl takes everything you give her and asks for more. When will it be enough, Thomas?" "Never," I said aloud to the empty room. "It will never be enough." I carried both suitcases to the living room and positioned them prominently in front of the couch where they couldn't possibly be missed. The sight was striking. 2 pieces of expensive luggage sitting like silent accusations in the center of the room. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "How are you holding up, Dad? Still planning for this afternoon?" I typed back, "Everything ready. Wish me luck." His response came quickly. "You've got this. She deserves everything that's coming to her." I settled into my recliner with the newspaper, positioning myself where I could see the front door clearly. The living room looked perfect: my 2 chairs, Margaret's china cabinet, the family photos on the mantel, and those 2 suitcases sitting like monuments to betrayal in the center of it all. At 1:45 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of their car pulling into the driveway. Car doors slammed, followed by Jessie's laughter about something Chris had said. Shopping bags rustled in their hands as they approached the front door. I took a deep breath and lowered my newspaper slightly, positioning myself for the performance of a lifetime. The key turned in the lock. "I think we got everything for tomorrow's." Jessie's voice cut off mid-sentence as the front door swung open. The sound of shopping bags hitting the hardwood floor echoed through the hallway like gunshots. "What the hell?" Chris's voice was sharp with confusion. "Jessie, are these our suitcases?" I could hear Jessie's footsteps moving quickly across the floor, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Dad, what is this?" she called out, her voice climbing toward hysteria. I kept my newspaper raised, savoring every second of their panic while maintaining my pose of an elderly man peacefully reading. Then something extraordinary happened. Jessie's voice changed completely, filling with genuine excitement. "Oh my God, Chris, he's finally packed. You mean the old man is actually leaving?" Chris caught on immediately, his voice lighting up with joy. "I can't believe it. Finally." Jessie was practically laughing now. "He's going to Sunset Manor. We won't have to go through with the whole Dr. Henderson thing. This is perfect." Chris was pacing now, his footsteps quick and energetic. "We can start the renovations next week. Maybe even call that contractor in Whitefish. $700,000. Chris, we're finally going to be free." They were celebrating. Actually celebrating what they thought was my surrender, my defeat, my willingness to disappear quietly from my own life. Every cruel word confirmed exactly who they really were. I slowly lowered my newspaper and looked directly at them. "No, sweetheart," I said in a perfectly clear, perfectly calm voice. "You are leaving my house." Jessie's face went white as paper. The excited smile froze on her lips before crumbling into an expression of pure horror. "Dad, did you hear me?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Chris stepped backward toward the door, his eyes wide with the dawning realization of what my clear speech meant. "Thomas, how long have you been able to hear?" "Every single word since I got home from the hospital 3 days ago," I replied. Jessie's hand flew to her mouth. "You heard everything we said. Every conversation about me being that old burden, every discussion about selling my house, every plan to have me declared incompetent so you could steal my life. Chris's face had gone from pale to red. Thomas, we were just frustrated. We didn't mean it. You meant every word. I cut him off. I know exactly who you are now, Chris. Both of you. Jesse's eyes filled with tears, but I could see the calculation behind them. Dad, we can explain. We were just worried about you. We thought you needed more care than we could provide. You calculated losing $700,000 of my money like it was already yours, I said, my voice steady and cold. You planned to have me declared mentally incompetent using forged medical evaluations. That was Chris's idea. Jessie pointed at her husband desperately. I would never do that to you. You called me a burden, Jessie, in my own house while planning to steal my independence and sell my home. Chris's shock was giving way to anger. You can't just kick us out. We have nowhere to go. We gave up our apartment to take care of you. You moved in here because you couldn't afford your own place, I replied calmly. And now you'll learn what it's like to find one without my help. Jessie dropped to her knees beside my chair, grabbing my arm with both hands. Please, Dad, I'm your daughter. I made a mistake, but I love you. I looked down at her. This woman who had taken everything I'd given her and still wanted more, who had planned to destroy my dignity and independence for money. If you loved me, Jessie, you wouldn't have called me a burden. You wouldn't have planned to have me declared crazy. You wouldn't have celebrated what you thought was my defeat. I pointed to the suitcases. You have everything you brought into my house. Everything you've accumulated while living here rent-free and planning my future. That's more than you deserve. Jessie's composure shattered completely. Tears streamed down her face as she dropped to her knees beside my chair, clutching at my arm with both hands. Dad, you're breaking my heart. I'm your little girl. I'm your daughter. Her voice cracked with what might have sounded like genuine emotion to someone who hadn't heard her celebrating my supposed surrender just minutes earlier. Please don't do this to me. Mom would be devastated to see you treating your own daughter this way. That was too much. I looked down at her with eyes as cold as winter frost. Your mother warned me about your selfishness before she died, Jessie. She said, watch out for Jessie. She only comes around when she needs something. Jessie's tear-streaked face went pale. She never said that. You're making it up. She said it after you asked me for $5,000 to pay for your anniversary cruise while she was in hospice care. That's not. I never. Jessie's voice faltered as the memory hit her. Chris stepped forward, trying a different approach. Thomas, look, we all made mistakes here. But we're family. We can work this out. Jessie seized on his words, her tears switching off like a faucet. Yes, Dad. We can fix this. I'll take better care of you. We'll cancel everything with Dr. Henderson. We'll be completely different. You showed me exactly who you really are, I replied steadily. And I believe you. But people change. Jessie's voice climbed toward hysteria. Give us another chance, please. Chris's attempt at reasonableness was cracking. His face reddened as his voice rose. You can't just throw us out like garbage. We have legal rights here. Actually, Chris, you have zero legal rights to my house. You're not tenants. You're not family members with any claim. You're house guests who have worn out their welcome. We'll contest the will. Chris jabbed his finger at me. We'll prove you're mentally incompetent. No sane person would disinherit their own daughter. I smiled calmly. Good luck with that. My lawyer has recordings of all our conversations about your plans. The blood drained from Chris's face. What recordings? You can't record private conversations without consent. Of course, there were no recordings, but the psychological effect was immediate and devastating. Jessie's eyes went wide with terror. Dad, please. We were just stressed. We didn't mean any of it. We were scared and said stupid things. You meant every word. You calculated my net worth down to the last dollar. You planned my future like I was already dead. Chris's desperation was making him aggressive. Where the hell are we supposed to go? We don't have any money. We gave up our apartment to take care of you. You moved in because you couldn't afford rent, I corrected. And that's not my problem anymore. Jessie tried one final emotional manipulation, her voice taking on the wheedling tone she'd used as a child when she wanted something. Dad, I gave up my whole life to take care of you. I sacrificed everything. I loved Mom just as much as you did. You missed your mother's funeral planning because Chris had a work party in Denver, I said. You told me it was a big opportunity that Mom would have wanted him to attend. Jessie's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. You visited her twice during her final month in hospice. Twice. I was there every day watching her ask where her daughter was. I couldn't handle seeing her like that, Jessie whispered. But you could handle planning to put me in a nursing home so you could sell the house where she died. Something in Jessie's face hardened. The mask of the loving, caring daughter finally fell away completely. Fine, she said, standing up and brushing off her knees. We'll leave, but you'll regret this, Dad. You'll be all alone, and when you need help, we won't be there. I'd been alone for 3 years, I replied calmly. At least now I won't have to pretend I'm not. Chris grabbed one of the suitcases with more force than necessary. This is insane. You're throwing away your own family. No, I said, watching them both struggle with their belongings. You threw away your family when you decided I was nothing more than an obstacle to your inheritance. Jessie picked up the second suitcase, her face twisted with resentment. You'll see, Dad. You'll see what it's like to be really alone. I'm looking forward to it. They moved toward the front door, their expensive belongings weighing them down like anchors. At the threshold, Jessie turned back one last time. If you change your mind. I won't. I cut her off. And don't call me asking for money. The door slammed behind them with a finality that echoed through the house like a bell. I stood at the living room window, watching Jessie and Chris struggle to fit their suitcases into their Ford Escape. Chris had to rearrange bags 3 times, cursing under his breath each time something wouldn't fit. Jessie sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, her face a mask of cold fury. Finally, the car doors slammed shut. The engine turned over, and they pulled out of my driveway for the last time. I watched until their tail lights disappeared around the corner, then continued watching the empty street for several more minutes. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced in years. Not the oppressive quiet of deafness, not the tense atmosphere of hidden hostility, but genuine peace. The house seemed to exhale around me, releasing 3 years of accumulated stress. I walked through each room slowly, noting the absence of their belongings. Jessie's expensive moisturizers were gone from the bathroom counter. Chris's golf magazines no longer cluttered the coffee table. The guest bedroom looked spacious and clean without their clothes scattered across every surface. In the kitchen, I found the shopping bags they dropped when they discovered the suitcases. I carried them to the garbage can without looking at the contents. Whatever they'd bought for their celebration of my supposed defeat could rot with the rest of their plans. I sat in my recliner in my living room, in my house, and experienced something I hadn't felt since Margaret's death. Complete contentment. No one was plotting against me. No one was calculating my worth or planning my future. I was alone, but I was free. My cell phone buzzed. Michael. Dad, how did it go? Are you okay? Son? They're gone. It's over. How are you feeling? Are you sure you're all right? I considered the question seriously. How was I feeling? Relief? Certainly. Vindication? But mostly I felt light, as if I'd been carrying a heavy burden for years without realizing it. I feel free for the first time since your mother died. I'm proud of you, Dad. Standing up for yourself like that. Mom would be proud, too. I should have listened to her warnings about Jessie years ago. Maybe, but you gave Jessie every chance to be the daughter you deserved. That's not a failure, Dad. That's love. We talked for 20 more minutes. Michael promised to visit soon. Maybe bring the kids for a weekend. They should know their grandfather, he said. The real one. After we hung up, I made myself dinner, a simple meal of scrambled eggs and toast, and ate it at the kitchen table while watching the sun set through the window. No one complained about the food. No one made sarcastic comments about my cooking. No one calculated how much my meal cost or speculated about when I'd be too old to cook for myself. I thought about Margaret's voice, how she used to say, "You deserve better than that treatment, Thomas." She'd been talking about Jessie even then, though I'd been too blind to see it. After dinner, I walked through the house one more time, this time really seeing it. The family photos on the mantel told a story now. Pictures of Michael and his children, of Margaret and me on our anniversaries, of holidays when Jessie was still young enough to genuinely love her family rather than just their money. I removed the photos that included Jessie and stored them in a drawer, not out of cruelty, but because I wanted to remember the good times without the bitter knowledge of how they'd ended. The mantel looked cleaner somehow, more honest. In my study, I pulled out a legal pad and began making a list. Call the bank about removing Jessie as emergency contact. update my medical directives, schedule lunch with old friends I'd neglected during Jesse's residency, plan a trip to Seattle to visit Michael and the grandchildren. For the first time in years, I was planning a future instead of just enduring the present. As I prepared for bed, I thought about something Margaret used to tell me during our early years together. Some people see kindness as weakness, Thomas, but they're wrong. Kindness is strength. And when you finally stop giving it to people who don't deserve it, that's wisdom. I'd finally learned the difference. In the quiet of my bedroom, I could hear my own breathing, steady and calm. No voices plotting in the kitchen below, no footsteps pacing with barely contained greed, just the sound of a man at peace in his own home. Tomorrow I would wake up in a house where I was wanted, where I belonged, where every decision was mine to make. I smiled in the darkness and slept better than I had in years.